Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Neil Barclay, who serves as president and CEO of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History right here in Detroit. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. You're so cheery today. You're always this cheery.
As long as we're talking about the arts, I tend to be pretty happy. So it's and it is a special honor, really, to be able to have you on the show today. I have been lucky enough to, be able to see, firsthand your leadership in the arts, literally over decades, and obviously, here in Detroit at the Wright. And so I'm really excited to kind of delve into a host of things, but I thought, especially for our national, even international audience, if you could kind of just share, a little bit more about the Wright, any key, exhibits or initiatives currently underway at the museum.
Sure. I mean, the Wright has been around now for 50 plus years. I think it's 55, 56 years since we were founded here in Detroit. And as such, it's kind of one of the oldest African-American museums that was created here in the country, right? It still is one of the largest encyclopedic museums, meaning that we deal with all aspects of Black culture, not just in a period of time or an individual, et cetera. And so next to the Smithsonian, we're still one of the largest institutions of its kind. And in that space, what we are attempting to do now is really also become best in class, to look at every aspect of our institution, to figure out ways we can make it better, more impactful, more interesting, working a lot now with new technologies as it relates to exhibit design, really thinking about creating a space in the museum just for children and families to really look at what's happening with our families on the ground and how that might be an aspect of the work that we do. Have some really, really great new colleagues, new executive leadership team. They're amazing. I could not be happier with them. So it's really one of those times of really great excitement and possibility for the Wright. And I'm really thrilled to be here. When I took this job, I was thinking, well, how long do I still want to do this? To your point, having known me for decades, and I was like, but this has been just a dream job for me. And it's challenging, but I absolutely love it.
Oh, well, that is awesome. And of course, the role of the museum in our community is huge. And so, and in some ways, maybe kind of backing out from that to kind of just this broader place of where we're at. You've had the ability to, to see across, several organizations and decades, kind of this arc or trajectory of not only arts organizations, but especially BIPOC focused and or led organizations. And obviously we've gone through this kind of transformation, it seems, over the last couple of years. Certainly a lot more talk at the very least, and maybe some action taking place. And curious, kind of from your perspective, where do you see especially philanthropy changing? Is it different now than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, specifically for BIPOC-centered organizations?
Well, I like to think it's different. Certainly, there have been some initiatives that have happened, particularly in our national foundation community, but also locally and regionally, that give us a lot of hope that more resources and more attention will be given to BIPOC organizations. I think the problem with that for someone like me, who's been around a long time, is we've sort of seen initiatives like this happen, certainly not to this degree. And I want to compliment the philanthropies that really kind of stepped up and done something major. But it gives you a little PTSD of like, did we see this movie before? And is this just going to be another influx of money And then, where are we going to be after that? And I think it causes a lot of us in the field to really think about, so what do we do with this moment? What if it is a passing phase, whether it is or not, how do we really navigate what is really a large influx of money from a lot of us, certainly attention for a lot of us. And so what do we do with that moment? And so it seems like me that my colleagues are looking at it two ways. Some of us are looking at it that let's do that thing that we always wanted to do, we knew we could do, we thought would put us on the map, but didn't have the resources to do. It's sort of looking at what we've done in the past that we really could have done so much better, right? Then there's this aspect of folks like, I think, and I'm in this camp that's like, what about just shoring up our basic business, if you will, model and organizational model such that we could weather anything that happens in the next 5 to 10 years. And we know there's rumblings of another pandemic coming, God forbid. There is other kinds of things that are happening economically with stocks and all that. Do we really want to build our reserves, put some money away for, an endowment? And that has really been what the Wright has tried to do, to really think about how do we weather in the next 5 to 10 years without a major disruption of the work that we want to do. And so I think those are two kind of different ways of looking at the moment, but I think they're both valid. I think it depends on the organization. For me, though, I immediately went to the latter.
Totally. I
put a little money away for a rainy day.
Right. Yes, I hear you.
And we don't know it. And we have this moment. Let's really leverage it to make sure that we can be around another 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that raises such an important point. And especially I think for BIPOC focused organizations. Yes, all arts organizations face it, but in some ways, BIPOC organizations have faced a much more roller coaster of usually financial resources over history, and kind of this more conservative approach versus kind of let's utilize this and do something significant, but then where will we be in 2 years when this funding might end? And I guess that gets to kind of, it's always tough to make predictions. But as you look at some of these newfound sources of revenue, organizations, funders who are looking at BIPOC issues and organizations in ways they haven't necessarily in the past, do you think those new revenue streams are going to be sustainable? So separate from kind of just the overall conservative approach and let's have an endowment and weather storms, do you think these new streams are actually sustainable, or do you worry that they may be temporary?
I do worry that they may be temporary, but I also think about it, Aaron, more in terms of what is the total resource package that BIPOC organizations have. And I think one of the ways that we have been put at a disadvantage is sort of privileging the maybe so-called mainstream model of heavily moneyed boards and people with certain kinds of resources and developing our organizations with that model, when in fact BIPOC organizations have existed, ours in this case for 50-something years, with frankly very few economic resources, right? So there has to have been something else at play, right? And can we begin to privilege, our ability in community engagement, right? In civil discourse, in different areas where BIPOC organizations have really excelled? Can we begin to look at and evaluate those as resources and then build new models for the way that we're looking at and then resourcing these organizations, right? So I think it is time for us as BIPOC organizations to think about what is it that we've always done well, and how do we resource that kind of model as opposed to trying to maintain a big board or, having a lot of corporate sponsors. And, we're lucky enough we have all of that, right? But I do worry that it doesn't play totally to our strengths in other areas, right? And so what I would love for Philanthropy to think about is, are there these models or things out there that we can look at, that really did result in success in terms of longevity, right? And then how do we deepen our resources in those areas such that, you know, these organizations can continue to thrive at what they actually do better than anyone else, right? So, you know, having been put in this other model, you know, yeah, a lot of us have been able to ape that and been successful. You know, I have a great board, for example, I have great staff, but it's not a model that's actually indigenous, to use that term, to Black culture, right? We haven't been surrounded by a lot of people with a lot of wealth, you know. We've been surrounded by real visionary leaders, smart people with really charismatic abilities to galvanize the community, right? And so how is that used? So.
Absolutely.
I have one more thing too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's a different subject, but go ahead. So I just have.
No, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're running a little bit short on time. And I was going to ask you, in terms of your own leadership, you know, thinking about these circumstances and, you know, especially the last couple of years, there's got to be those challenging days. And just curious, as a leader, where do you turn for either inspiration, for strength during those toughest times when you're in that leadership role and so many are looking to you for guidance?
You know, I have an amazing group of colleagues and friends in the field, as you know many of them. And I think that's who I turn to be honest, to just get their thoughts and input. But it raises a question that I did want to just touch on briefly here, and that is the leadership crisis that I think BIPOC organizations are, if not facing now, are about to face. We have all these great emerging leaders, you know, kind of programs around the country. And as I look at those programs, I worry about where are these young people emerging to? What are the opportunities that exist for them to come into the field and get the kind of training and expertise that they need to really run what have become very complex organizations? Whether they're large or small, running a nonprofit nowadays is not for the faint of heart, right? You really have to have a certain skill sets in order to make that happen. And I think about, having been trained as an attorney, I think about, you know, is there a clerkship program for arts leaders where you really are working closely with a really experienced leader, working with the problems that they're dealing with, helping them to address and, you know, research, think about these issues. Or in medicine, you know, the residents, you know, I happen to go to a teaching hospital here in Detroit, and I love it when I come in, there's like 20 people that come into the room, and they're all the residents who are dealing with that particular issue, you know? And it's exciting to listen to them banter about, what could this be? What is it? What are you looking at? Why are you looking at that? What do you think that means? You know, and it's just fascinating. And could we develop something that is more experiential for our leaders than what we have today, right? And so that's something I'm really working a lot on and hope to be able to do more work on. I work with Arts Midwest with some of the work they're doing in that area. South Arts certainly is doing more in that area. And actually all the regional arts organizations are trying to do more in that area. So that's something that's just really a pet peeve of mine. I hope that gets established before I'm too old to keep coming to the office and wearing a tie.
Well, that is such an extraordinarily important point, and obviously where we have the young emerging leaders, those who will follow in our footsteps, and how they're prepared, the opportunities they have, so critically important. Neil Barclay, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been a pleasure. Love it.